everyone. Welcome back. Happy 2023. This is another episode from the Woods Collab. This is the Woods Collab podcast. This is
Nikisha Woods.
And I'm Mike Woods, and we are the Woods Collab, and we're back. So we're right back today to kick off the new year, to talk about things that can get in the way of progression when it comes to personal and professional development. So Nikisha and I are going to share some tips and best practices of things that we can acknowledge, things that we can be aware of, and things that we can do to counter anything or anyone that might be in the way of our progression when it comes to professional development.
Yes, that's a lot to think about and unpack. And so as we unpack it, we want you to put on your self-awareness, self-reflection cap, and really think about if this is you falling into this circumstance. So specifically when it comes to your leader's ability to lead you, we have identified as leaders ourselves that there might be things that your leader is not sharing that could create an obstacle for you. And so what we want to do is to talk through how to overcome that obstacle. So the very first thing they might do is they may just be uncomfortable or not understand how to give you constructive feedback. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'd say leaders have a challenge of providing feedback. So looking at it for me in my leadership journey, there were times where I wasn't always as comfortable giving feedback. And until we started to, research it and start to really understand the value of it. And I think a lot of times it could come with, sometimes you're not invested in that individual enough. That could be one thing where it's like, you know what, I don't think that thing is worth it. There could also be times where you just don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And there could also be times where it's just uncomfortable having that tough conversation. We gotta keep in mind that, of course, leaders are people too, and none of us are perfect. And sometimes it's very challenging. And when sometimes things are that challenging, we might just kind of shy away from it a little bit. But on the flip side, by not sharing that feedback, we're taking away from an opportunity for an individual to get better.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I feel like, if you sweep something under the rug long enough, you'll trip over it. And I also feel like at the end of the day, like you said, we are people and leaders are people. And so maybe some people you just don't, maybe you gave them feedback before and you thought you did everything in the leader book and it didn't go well, right? Maybe they still do the same thing, or maybe they were resentful towards you because of it. And so, we tell ourselves these stories about why we shouldn't bother with giving the feedback. But at the end of the day, us not sharing what we see could be holding that person back. And then we find ourselves sharing that constructive feedback in the performance reviews when we're held accountable to, okay, so how are you rating this associate or team member for this year? And it's like, well, honestly, they're not performing in this way. Have you honored them with the truth and share that information? So yeah, it could definitely be, the leader getting in their own way. And from my experience, when I did it, I was making the feedback about me and not about the employee. I was saying, okay, well, I don't feel like doing this. I don't know how they're going to react. I feel uncomfortable. My palms are sweaty. Instead of, okay, I know this person wants to grow, so how can I help them to grow as their leader?
Yeah, and a lot of times individuals do want that, even though sometimes it may be tough to give because you're essentially calling out an opportunity or error or flaw, whatever you want to call it, for someone. And a lot of times people want to hear that. It's like, okay, if I'm out here wandering, going this way, astray, you only know I can swim so much. Don't let me go all the way out there if you saw me going out there. Yeah. Instead of it's like, hey, heads up, you drowning. Now, sometimes if that's a life lesson to say, hey, bet you're going to learn next time. That's one story. But it was like, hey, if you saw me going out that way, sometimes I believe in leadership, we might say, I don't really want to call them out. But it's like, when you tell me, I'm like, oh, cool, great. I got to work on my technique a little bit more. So then I can take that as an opportunity to get better because somebody called me out on my opportunity to get better.
Agreed. All right. So that's the first thing that could be an obstacle that gets in the way of your growth, your development in the workplace. The next one is maybe your leader is not providing feedback because they don't actually know what you do, right? You show up, you punch in, you're here, you're smiling, no one's complaining.
Right.
No one's complaining, so you must be doing a fantastic job. But if they had to, for their life, explain what you do in a day-to-day,
it's like,
you
what
might not
what
make
is
it.
it? Exactly. You know things are quiet, but may not know the big scope of what's going on. That's a good one.
Yeah. So, and it could even be the quality of how you do your work, right? It could be projects that you work on. They may only be, because leaders do have to be more big picture focused. So it might just be, did you meet this by the deadline, and how you actually get there, they don't know. So you could actually be doing some really cool and amazing and awesome things that in your mind, you're like, I'm killing it every day. And your leader has no idea you're killing it. And I used to think that if you're my leader, you should just know.
Yeah.
You should just know that, I'm getting these emails from people. They're telling me that I'm amazing, that this is high quality, all the hours I spend in this project, how I'm staying up late, the sweat, the sacrifice. And then I became a leader and I'm like, oh yeah, I got 7 people. I don't necessarily know every single thing you do or how much work or time you put into things.
Yeah, that's why it's important to, I know we get into the how to counter these things a little bit later, but it's important to have those conversations and to say, hey, because if we think about it on the surface, like, well, how does the person supposed to know what I'm doing? If we take a step back and think about it,
Yeah.
it's like, how would they know? But it's important to, provide that awareness, have that conversation, at least say, hey, did you know I'm doing this? And maybe the leader might be like, yeah, I really don't care about that. But if that's the case, that's okay. At least you said and you told and you shared what you're out there doing.
Yeah, and I know that, leaders, a lot of times we don't want to get into that micromanagement space. And so what we're talking about is not how to get your leader to micromanage you or understand every single detail of what you do. But there are things that you do that are amazing, that are phenomenal, or maybe even need some help and some guidance on that you might not share. And so how, as a leader, can I provide feedback if I don't know, if it's hidden, or if you're doing some great things and now we're at performance time and I'm like, yeah, you did good. You met your deadlines. That's awesome. And you're like, okay, but I literally created a new program from scratch. And I stayed up every single night and I looped in all these different people and they helped collaborate on it. And so now instead of getting this outcome, we get that outcome. That is what the leader needs to know. Because other than that, when it comes to performance reviews, they're still looking big picture and they're still thinking, okay, they met the deadline and they're supposed to meet the deadline.
Right. And sharing that thing. And if you take away like, okay, yeah, maybe they should know. Okay, cool, great. But if they just don't, use that to your advantage. Use that leverage to have the conversation, at least to showcase what you have done. And so that's another point. And another thing we talked about as far as a third point, that's something that could be holding you back, is that there could be certain biases. Like biases are real things. You talked about like the like me bias and confirmation bias. So talk a little bit about that and how that could essentially hold someone back.
Yeah, so if your leader is best friends forever with someone on the team that just so happens to have a lot in common with them, and that thing that they have in common could be, maybe they're the same gender, the same race, the same age, the same, maybe they went to the same college and they have those connections. It's okay to have commonalities and connections with people, but when we're starting to make decisions as leaders, as far as, okay, who do I want to put in the seat based on that commonality, that's where that's a big no-no. And that's where it could be holding you back, because you just I was hired for diversity, right? To bring a different perspective. But when it's time to actually be included, that inclusion piece into different projects, I'm not the first person that my leader thinks about. So I would definitely say that one. As far as the confirmation bias, that could be something as simple as I messed something up and now no one will ever forget it. So talk to us about like what that could be if you make a mistake, or if you're seen a certain way by your leader, trying to get out of that every single time I do something that could be in that same vein, instead of getting like a fresh start, having it be that confirmation bias and confirming to that leader that I'm not able or capable or shouldn't have this particular thing happen.
Yeah, to fight out of that, I think it goes back to, we talk a lot about having that relationship with the individual. So having that conversation, because it's one thing to say, all right, you make a mistake with somebody that you don't know, then you make a mistake with somebody that you know, that person knows your work ethic, knows that, okay, maybe it was just a mistake. So I think the first, having that awareness, another thing is to be honest about it. There's no need to cover it up, because if you mess something up, be upfront about it. Hey, you know what? This did not go according to plan. I made this mishap. I sent this type of communication. I didn't. Deadline was missed, or deadline is on the way to be missed. Own up to it. Fess up to that. And as you get in front of that, maybe go in with some suggestions on what could have been done to prevent it, or what you're doing about it now.
Absolutely.
That play builds a lot of trust. And it does good to, repair any image issues that you may have. So let's say issue happened. Hey, heads up, leader, this thing happened. Here's how it happened. Here's how I have addressed it so that it does not happen again. As a matter of fact, here's also what I'm doing about this particular thing right now. So now, right then and there, you share with the leader, hey, heads up, I want you to know that I'm aware that I made a mistake. Also, I want you to know that I could right or wrong as well. I think those things build trust.
Yeah. I like that you're moving into those best practices, of course, for as far as what can I do to overcome these obstacles. And I think with the bias, I think at the end of the day, understanding that biases, there are some conscious and there are some unconscious, right? And so that confirmation bias could be an unconscious bias that leader has. They're just a little bit less open and willing to trust with the project in the future because of a mistake. I think by having a real candid conversation about it, like Mike said, I think that's huge, because it brings it to the forefront and it brings it from the unconscious to the conscious. So that was a great best practice for overcoming the confirmation bias. What are some things you can do to overcome, maybe your leader doesn't know what you do? Like, how do you make that known?
Yeah, I'm a fan of talking. I think it's just so important. I think I got that honest. But I think it's so important to have conversations. Take time to be proactive with setting up time to share what you're doing. At least a level set. Maybe it's weekly, maybe it's bi-weekly, maybe it's monthly, maybe it's quarterly, depending on the person and the relationship and the impact there. But have a conversation. Document what you're doing throughout your time working on a thing. Set up time to talk to your leadership team and say, hey, here's some things that I'm working on. Here's the impact. What's your thoughts on it? I want to share this with you for awareness, and see how that goes.
I love how you said set up time with your leader, because
don't wait.
Don't leave it up. Listen, your leader means well, okay? But that is a human being. And sometimes making a doctor's appointment for me, it goes right over my head.
And sometimes everybody don't want to meet and set up a meeting.
Yeah. And so putting that back on yourself to say, okay, how often do I need to meet with my leader? Letting that leader know that I'm going to set up some meetings with them to talk about my performance, projects that I'm working on, give them high level overviews of what you're doing. And it feels sometimes uncomfortable and weird for people to brag on themselves. Sometimes I'm like, dang, I'm like bragging. But at the end of the day, I did that, right? So communicating it to them so that they understand it. And then Mike mentioned it, but document it, write it down when you're in the thick of it, when you came up with something new, when you had a new idea that is being put into place, when you're making a difference. Write it down. And when you have debrief conversations on projects, make sure that you talk about not only the things that went well, but the things that could go better in the future. It shows that you have that level of awareness, and that you're also, even though this was a great project, you're looking at making it go better the next time, for example. So write it down, document it, email it to your leader, because when performance reviews come around, we don't need amnesia, right? We need them to have clear understanding of what we do. And also, if you write your own reviews for your own performance, it helps you to document your performance reviews as well.
Yeah, and feel free, along with that, feel free to communicate it as you go as well. There's one thing to have that, let's say if there's a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly meeting, feel free to start providing some communication all throughout. Heads up, here's this milestone is coming up. Here's what we have done so far. Here's how this milestone, the deadline will be reached. Heads up, here's how this deadline may be in jeopardy. Send that communication, and then when you have that formal meeting, maybe do an overview, a debrief. Say, hey, how was the communication that I provided you throughout? Did that work for you? Was it too much? Did you not need enough? And kind of start to build from there.
Yeah, and I think that's a great transition into the last obstacle we talked about is maybe your leader isn't comfortable with giving feedback. They don't know how to give you feedback. Ask for it. And, you know, you might have to take a deep breath when you say, do you have any feedback for me? Take the deep breath, but take the feedback. Because at the end of the day, my philosophy is I want to see your hand. I want to know what you're thinking. Yeah. I want to understand where we stand. I do not want any surprises at performance review time. I want to know how you feel I showed up. Now, with feedback, we've talked about it a million times. Some of it, we may be like, yep, I see that, I understand it. And some of that, we might have an eyebrow raised and we're like, nah, fam, I don't know if that's for me. But at the end of the day, that is how your leader sees you. So when you have that feedback, now you can at least help to change that perspective, maybe shift in a way that you need to shift so that you all can align when it comes to how your performance is reviewed. So ask for the feedback, ask how you're doing. So let's do a quick role play on how you would ask for feedback from your leader. So, hey, Mike, how was your weekend? How are things with you?
Hey, weekend was great. I chilled and relaxed the entire weekend, which was exactly what I wanted to do. How was yours?
It was great. So how are things on the work front? How are things going for you?
Work front, things are going cool so far, but I did have something I need to get from you. I need some feedback. I need some feedback on how I worked on this project. So can you tell me about how I'm doing?
You did great. I would definitely say keep doing what you're doing.
Keep doing what I'm doing. Okay, what are some things that, like, specifically, because I really want to drive in on this.
Okay.
What are some specific things you say I'm doing great? And is there anything that I can work on to get better? So I really want to take this and move to the next spot.
Yes, you drilled down.
Just like that.
You drilled down. Like because listen, if I'm a leader and I do not want to sweat, I can say you're doing great. Keep doing what you're doing. And that person could just let that sit and say, yes, no news is good news, and just roll with it. But if you ask for what can I do better, and I like how you phrase that, it's not saying what you did was trash, which I mean, honestly, sometimes we do trash.
It may be. Sometimes it may be.
But you phrase it in a way that, what can I do to get better? So even things that are not necessarily like dumpster fires, there are still things that maybe you can go from good to great. And now you're having your leader work. You're having your leader really think about it and give impactful feedback.
Yeah. And keep in mind, no one's perfect. We're not perfect. Our leaders are not perfect. But what we can do is that we can work together in order to get better. So having those conversations, documenting those things, being hungry about you wanting to get better, you progressing. And that could require you to get out of that comfort zone and have the difficult or the uncomfortable conversation. But to your point about the feedback, is one thing about asking for the feedback, but also we got to be open to that as well.
For
so
sure.
Of course we want to hear the, yep, did great. Of course that's the win, but we also got to be open to like, okay, yeah, cool, that was great, but maybe you need to tap into that a little bit. I know for me, those are some embers that kind of light me up and kind of keep me going. Those inches where I can get better.
I love it.
You love it?
I love it.
Cool.
So we had a lot of conversation today about overcoming obstacles that may get in the way of your growth and your performance in the workplace today. And so things we talked about specifically are getting feedback from your leader, making sure your leader knows what you're doing, those high level things, documenting those things, and how to not fall into that confirmation bias that leaders may have when you make a mistake. How do you bounce back? How do you regroup? And how do you show that you have learned from that situation? So this is the Woods Collab podcast. Thank you so much for watching.